Hello and welcome to the Angel Capital Group. I'm Scott Ewing. It's March 10th, 2015. I'm here with John Maddox, the Chief Marketing Officer and Partner in Trusted Response, a Nashville, Tennessee startup. And Trusted Response is a software company. They were first scouted by our Nashville club and introduced to us there last November 2014. They were invited for a first pitch tryout to our Fort Lauderdale club last month. John, welcome to the broadcast. And this broadcast will be going out to our investors from the Rocky Mountains to the Sunshine State, from the Great Lakes and Great Plains out to the Atlantic Seaboard. So welcome here.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with me. I hope I'll be able to live up to the grilling you're about to get.
Knowing you, I'm sure you will. It's a piece of cake for you. Thanks for joining us. We do have a number of questions for you today, but before we actually get into the interview, John, I'd like to take a moment to talk about your background so we can get an idea of your story. You've been an entrepreneur since college. You founded and exited companies that perform marketing, website, app creation, media production, search engine optimization. Lately, you've been involved in enterprise software development. What's your latest company project, Trusted Response, all about, John, and how did you get involved?
Well, my background's really been, as you pointed out, in the entrepreneurial space, but specifically in the technology interactive world. They became very interesting to me after my last venture in the traditional marketing space, and I really saw opportunity in that world. How this culminated in Trusted Response, what I'm involved in now, was I sold my agency a couple years ago, and the reason I did so is I really wanted to find a interesting software as a service platform that I could dedicate my experience and resources into, because as a vendor, I'd seen so many fantastic ideas come my way. Some had become clients, others I had to turn down because they didn't have the capital available. But a trend that I'd noticed in a lot of them was not understanding a lot of the aspects of business development, business logic, customer acquisition strategy, all those pieces, and I saw a lot of really great ideas fall on their face. And when Gary Somerhalder, the CTO and founder of Trusted Response, he called me out of the blue last year, and he was actually, when he worked for another company 4 years prior, he had called me out of the blue, and that company had become a client of mine.
Okay.
And anyway, so fast forward to now rewind to last year, he calls me and starts telling me about Trusted Response, and my vendor hat kind of kicked in. I'm sitting there thinking about all of the different ways that so many issues that clients come to me with were solved by this platform. And the whole virtualization of business, which obviously I'll be talking about much more detail in the pitch tonight, but that trend is rapidly accelerating. That market is exploding, and to be blunt, it's one that's almost difficult to completely compartmentalize because it's a relatively new space, and I don't want to go off on a long-winded diatribe there, but it's something that I saw as
passionate about.
Great potential, and it was one of those things. I think it's what I'm looking for. I know Gary's smart as a whip, and
so tell us about Gary Somerhalder, the CEO, and your other founder, Butch Dunbar, the Chief Operating Officer. Tell about them a little bit, and what roles you've carved out for yourselves in the company.
Gotcha. Well, Gary, he's been specifically in healthcare prior to this, involved in being an enterprise software engineer. Quite a few notches in his belt, so to speak, in that space. Very cutting edge, very intuitive, and forward-thinking technologist. And one of those people that's always researching the latest and greatest, figuring out how it correlates with projects he's working on, and believes there's no problem he can't solve. Obviously, we all know there's something you can come into, but if you approach a problem without the mindset of, hey, I can solve this, right, then you're destined to not come up against a brick wall. Butch is actually one of the initial investors in Trusted Response. He's an attorney out in Texas, and the reason he became involved was he found out about it through a buddy of his and called up Gary and said, hey, I want this for me, and became a customer. He was one of the first beta customers, and then Gary's like, well, I need some, I'm ready to take this to another level. Would you be interested in investing? And he wrote him a check that day. And since then, he's invested more capital into it, and is actually injecting another round right now. He has been looking at this from I like being a lawyer. He makes good money. I mean, it's not a financial issue, but he looks at this as something that will be a lot of fun to do, and help him retire from being an attorney, to be honest. But he's been very, very helpful for us on the legal space. It's always nice to have counsel,
Right,
as
sure.
a member and an investor.
Yep.
They got multiple reasons to pay attention, make sure things are being done right.
Good. Well, that's outstanding. And we do have a number of questions for you. So some regard your software product, some regard the market. And I think to start, why don't I just ask you, give us your 30-second elevator pitch, and then tell us why should we care about Trusted Response?
All right, the elevator pitch is there's a lot of third-party platforms that enable virtual interaction with a customer. There's GoToMeeting, there's WebEx, BlueJeans, there's a plethora of them out there. They've already been established and already making boatloads of money. It's not a concept you have to convince people of. Our system enables you to integrate this into your brand with no software downloads required for the user, no account creation types, and a variety of commonplace business functions have been integrated to our system to accentuate the ROI from advertising, increase conversion percentages, and also streamline efficiency and opportunity cost for day-to-day business activities, interactions with clients that normally have to do in person, or it's a complicated process to make them happen.
Okay. There are obviously some underlying assumptions in that business model. Trusted Response appears to be focused on driving volume in transactions to do more in less time. The implication is that the volume of transactions or speed of transactions is a limiting factor for businesses. And you've mentioned to me previously that the market you're working in deals with customers who are involved in one-off transactions, perhaps similar to someone who received a court summons, needs to get in touch with an attorney on short notice. The attorney's going to do one transaction, but that process needs to move pretty quickly from the client interview at first to actually securing the services of the attorney. But another type of service that you've looked at, or another type of market you've looked at, is what I'd call a high-touch business, where, for example, financial services, trust is built over time. It's not just a single transaction. So you've got the low-touch, the high-touch businesses. In my mind, they're not the same. Tell me a little bit about if your business is trying to drive speed, and in one case, the low-touch speed may be the limiting factor, but in the high-touch business, quality of transaction may be more important. How do you address both, or do you? Where do you fall on that balancing act?
Well, directly answer the question. I think there's a lot more. This is a rapidly expanding market. I think some of that is yet to be 100% determined. I know that from the clientele and the target markets we're going after, the responses from both high touch and low touch has been very, very positive. In more to address the high touch, there's been significant market research, especially in demographics under 35, that the digital interaction has a lot of the same impact on them as face-to-face. And some portions of it, a decent percentage, also views it as almost, they like it better, especially for the initial engagement. Or here and there, like, hey, this time I meet you in person, next time it's on video, and be flexible around their schedules. It's a way to maintain that relationship aspect on the very personal level, but not having to constrict it to, hey, are you available this time on this day in this place, versus, hey, I'm sitting in front of my computer, I can get on my phone, and we can interact and solve XYZ problem very, very rapidly, or I can make a decision quickly. And you and I've talked about this on the phone before in context of, hey, what can I invoke from a phone call versus an in-person meeting versus video.
Right.
I know you have a lot of background in that space, and it's I know some of the older demographics don't have some of the adoption that younger ones do, but it's showing the trend is rapidly accelerating into adoption of the virtual environment.
Well, second to perhaps waiting, in which drives people crazy. You know, whether you've got to wait on customer service, whether you've got to wait for a computer app to load. Study after study has proven that if an American has to wait more than about 90 seconds, their perception of time begins to change, and they actually feel like they're waiting double the time that they are actually being made to wait. So 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes seems to be the threshold. People like to be served quickly, and so I can
shorten that time is shortening on a daily basis.
And I can appreciate that driving faster transactions may be perceived as improving the quality of service. But second to waiting, what customer service studies or customer satisfaction studies show is often that the other part of a transaction people hate the most is the moment when they're asked to pay. Not surprisingly, the point where they have to break out their wallet, that's what they hate. And smart merchants like IKEA do everything they can to try to, I wouldn't say distract, but to engage the customer beyond simply the cash transaction. So if you're in a checkout line in IKEA, for example, there are a number of things going on around you that are meant to distract you. There's the gourmet food aisle just beyond the checkout, and then beyond that is the restaurant that they offer. So you begin to think about your stomach, not your wallet, while you're making the transaction, and it eases the pain a little bit. One of the things that I noticed in your demo is that the cash transaction, the purchase, the point where you're being asked to break out the wallet, is the first thing your potential customer encounters using your software. And I'm wondering if you feel that might not be counterproductive to building a happier relationship, or how that might have been perceived in product trials. So talk a little bit about that, since you are somewhat breaking the known boundaries of customer satisfaction by asking to pay up first.
Well, I'm actually very glad you brought that up. We actually did think about that, and we have two different aspects for the payment. So if I want to, because you're absolutely correct, 100% correct in everything you just said, and something I want to address as well is the way we structured this is research shows that the number one drop-off point on transactions happens between making online e-commerce happens between making the selection of what you want to buy and then going to a checkout. That's where it drops off. Correlates with what you're saying from a physical sense, also in the digital. Which is why we put this all happening. All the transaction action is happening on the same page, so you're not going through multiple stages.
Okay.
It all happens simultaneously. And from a distraction standpoint, it's part of the reason we build in the ability to have this happen in conjunction with video correspondence, or audio, or vice versa.
Right.
Of, hey, I can see her be talking to you. Hey, pull out your credit card and type it in while I'm doing this. Now,
So they're engaged while they're making the transaction.
correct. Now, the way we have logic rules set up for different ways it's going to be implemented, you don't have to have the pay up front piece set up to go first.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be in that conjunction. We can do it for free up front. There can be no engagement until post
Okay.
deal. We also have the ability for, let's say I'm doing a B2B deal and we're negotiating back and forth. And I'm pretty sure, with the freezy math, it was $1,000, or I was asking you for $1,250, and I was pretty sure you'd do it for $1,000. And I say, well, hey, will you do it for $1,000? Will you get this deal done today? And you say, absolutely. Well, I can literally on my end, in real time, type in that amount and execute the functionality for that deal. And in real time on your end, while we're still sitting here talking, it pops up and you can put in your credit card information, and we've engaged and executed the deal.
Okay. So you obviously thought about that, and then so let's turn to your software build and your use of funds. I know you've completed your 1.0 version of your software. You're working now on 2.0, but if I understood your funding plan, the money that you're raising now is not really going toward developing out your 2.0 version. I remember if I looked at your budget the first time around when I saw it, it was more concerned with getting getting the product launch done now. So 2/3 of your raise was going to be allocated to SG&A, about $12,000 for web hosting, leaving about $37,600, if I remember correctly, for marketing, which is not really a lot as far as a dedicated marketing budget to break into a market and to build product awareness. So how do you feel about that? Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Well, we actually, and you're going to find out about this in the pitch tonight. We just got $150,000 injected that covers that what we were originally looking for, and what we were looking for in that capital, to be very direct on that, was short-term operational expenses and expanding the traction of the platform before going for a larger scale raise.
Okay.
I've dealt with a lot of startup companies myself, and I know a lot of them ask for a boatload of money before they are ready. And I've built several companies without any investment capital, and I know you're much smarter with your money when you don't have money to burn.
We like bootstrappers.
Which was part of the reason for that. And directly in context of what you said on the marketing budget, I agree. I would love to have more money than that for marketing. However, I have a significant amount of experience in marketing, and given the hyper-targeted nature of the markets we're going to go after, and the digital platforms available to us now, that's actually a pretty sizable budget for initial traction gaining and getting ready to take things to a bigger level.
Okay, so we'll get to the market a little more in a moment, but let's talk a little bit about the design of the software itself. So some things I'd like to run through with you, things you would normally discover perhaps during product development or a marketing survey set, is the user interface on this software, is it intuitive? I mean, how have your testers responded to it? Does the design feel lively, or does the design feel dead in any places? How is that perceived so far?
Well, pretty much everyone I've shown it to and has tested it so far liked it and was able to use it. And wow, this is pretty darn streamlined and easy to use. Directly answer your question in context of the UI, the liveliness. We want to do a dramatic UI redesign.
Okay.
Part of the you're just making this comment about bootstrapping. It was what was the best place to spend the money? Get a working prototype, beta clients, etc., or spend a bunch of money on the UI. But to answer your question on that, UI is we have a whole mapped out upgrade.
So you've created the minimum viable product, and now you're going to make it more user friendly. So what do customers so far generally like or dislike about the software as you've gotten it, even recognizing that you've got some improvements that you've already decided to introduce?
The number one thing is no software downloads required. I can click a button. Every single person we've shown those to loved that ability and the intuitive nature for the user, the customer side. They also love the back end side because it's incredibly simplistic to use. But on the front end, hey, I'm sitting here on a phone call with this customer, and I can say, hey, push that button, and we start a conference. That has been the number one thing that's come back. And then secondary to all that is obviously the payment. One thing's being talked about already, but we also have time tracking built in, which correlates with the payment structure. So, hey, I can sell my time online inside of my brand, and it be tracked, and I can deal from a cash flow perspective. The money can be in my bank account within 2 days. That's been a very attractive factor for them.
So do males and females, you find, interact with the software the same way? Have you seen any differentiation? Because men and women are a little different as the way they approach any transaction.
Right. Well, the majority of our test cases so far have been male.
Okay. Maybe something you want to look at.
There's just where some of that money's going to go into much larger scale user testing. But the ladies that we have had tested liked it a lot. There was a few that wanted to make sure they looked good on camera, but a lot of them really liked it being able to engage. And what they really heard from them was, I like being able to see who I'm talking to.
Well, you say that, look good on camera. There is good software has a sense of empowerment about it, and part of empowerment is sometimes the way you project your image, and the face-to-face interaction that goes with that. So, are there elements that you've discovered that make people feel empowered or powerful? Because that can be a very big driver to adoption.
Well, one of the things that this is almost the reverse of what you're asking me, but one of the functions we built in was counting for whether or not somebody wanted to be seen on camera, but they wanted to see who they were talking to. So in our system, with a click of a button, you can not project video on your end, but I can still see you, or vice versa.
That's smart.
So that was just one of those minor use cases and functionality pieces that we put into effect.
So about your market now, you've obviously figured out how many software subscriptions you're going to need to sell in order to reach a break even in your market. Do you have any idea how many software seats or how much software you'll have to sell in order to get to your break even point in this market, in the market you've chosen?
At our current expenditure, it's 40 customers is break even.
Okay. That's an important number to obviously keep in mind. So you talk in your pitch, kind of shifting gears slightly, about using the cloud to virtualize business. And a lot of technology businesses use words like virtualize without offering a clear definition. We never, as investors, want to get stuck playing a game of buzzword bingo. You can tell we like to know what it is that the entrepreneur is trying to tell us.
Are you saying we try to use buzzwords?
No, I'm just saying we don't want. So we want the entrepreneur to be clear. And what I am clear about is that industry data right now shows about 6% of retail transactions are being conducted today online. And that number over the next few years is expected to rise to about 10%. So there's still a place in the world for, obviously, going to be a place for the traditional brick and mortar kind of sale. But what industry data is also showing us is that more and more users or adopters are taking internet commerce tools and using them to do research, pricing, sort of the advanced scouting for what they want before they go and perform a traditional transaction. It's kind of an interesting use of the internet. I would argue that e-commerce is obviously here to stay. You're obviously interested in seeing it expand, but that some of what has been sold to the public about e-commerce, that it's going to rule the world, is probably hype. I mean, in many e-commerce programs are clumsy. They're sometimes annoying. Sometimes they're perceived as being made for geeks, designed by geeks, and they can't, whether or not you're doing a brick and mortar style transaction or an e-commerce transaction, you can't escape the human element involved. Human nature is human nature. People don't like to wait. People don't like to pay. People like certain other things. So perhaps some of what has driven e-commerce to date is not because e-commerce is better. It's that what it's replaced has often been lousy. And how would you address that? How would you say that is your product or service a better mousetrap, or is it just replacing a bunch of transactions that have generally been perceived as lousy because the customer service wasn't good or the process was annoying or getting to yes has been painful in a lot of industries?
That was a very multi-stage question.
Yeah, long question.
I'm actually glad you brought that up. As a former software and web development vendor, I agree with you 1,000% on the complexities.
Buzzword bingo?
The buzzword bingo and the complexity of e-commerce. And I agree with you that it's not going to replace in its entirety. It is rapidly accelerating, as you mentioned. Last year, e-commerce surpassed brick and mortar for Christmas buying, for example. But I agree with you completely on the research side. And I don't necessarily look at what we're doing as a replacement for traditional e-commerce. I see this as a component of for certain markets, but then also a potential accentuation piece for established e-commerce. So, for example, you're talking about the research phase, right? And I don't want this to come off as looking at so many different markets and there's no focus. But one of the potential aspects of this is implementing into e-commerce, and let's say you have a product that people want to see and do that research on, right? Well, I go and I'm looking at this product. What if I could have a representative of this business show me that product in action in real time, talk to me about it, tell me more insight about that piece, and then I can make a decision if I want to buy it online or if I want to go in to the store and purchase it. There's a variety of angles that can be leveraged there. It's not necessarily, as I said earlier, not a necessary replacement for, but a accentuation piece or a tool, increase conversion percentages. As I know you know I'm good at a lot of the stats, but if you can increase your conversion percentage, especially in e-commerce, with the much lower overhead, removing some of the hard costs, your profit starts to get very, very interesting very, very quickly.
Conversion ratio is the critical, metric, I think, in any kind of sales-oriented business. It tells you how well you're utilizing the resources you have. So that's if that is one of the objectives of your service or your software as a service, that should be an important driver.
Well, the last point on this for me, I know I keep referring back to my previous experience as a interactive agency owner, but I was hired by so many, I had over 800 clients, and we were hired to figure out ways to increase conversion. And that's one of the things that interests me so quickly in Trusted Response, was I was immediately thinking of all the different ways we could have implemented this into strategies, and we were looking for ways to increase ROI.
Got it. John, let me ask you some basic questions, and we'll go through these in fairly rapid order, I think. So does your software project demonstrate uniqueness?
Yes.
And how have you identified it in terms of product competition or distinguishing yourself? What's the thing that you can use to sustain differentiation? I guess that's the best way of phrasing that question.
Well, there's really two aspects to that, or two answers I want to give to that question. I'd say the primary one is the business logic integration for the payment and using it as a conversion tool from a revenue standpoint versus just purely an interaction tool. So there are folks that have the video component, but none that I've seen so far in our research that have a lot of the business logic put into place on payment. And a quick example that I'll keep it short is we built in logic rules that you can change the pricing structure based on time of day, type of engagement, type of service. I mean, there's a plethora of things you can do from a sales funnel perspective and making it and maximizing the return that you get from using our software.
Okay. Does Trusted Response have the potential to preempt or to even dominate the market you're going after?
I believe so. one of the primary markets we're planning on targeting is, or already targeting, is the financial advisory world. I know that's some of your background. I actually have a joint venture letter of intent agreement with a pretty established group in Nashville who loves it and wants to be heavily engaged in it. He said, I've been looking for a tool like this to provide to my advisors for a long time. As you know, the financial advisory world is a little bit antiquated from a technology standpoint. There's a lot of prime opportunity to go after that.
I was going to ask you if a technology push exists, and it sounds to me as though there are people, or maybe that's a market pull, asking for a solution to some of the current tools that are out there.
But the last thing I want to say on the domination of market, I think it would be egotistical for me to say that we're gonna come out and just dominate the entire market. It's a rapidly growing one, and secondary to all that, it's a big one.
Yeah.
I don't think that there'll be one or two or three players that dominate this market because there's so many different niche industries that this can be applied to. I don't think anybody can account for every single one of them.
Well, since it is a big market, is there a compelling pricing story that you can create around yours, or do you have a market or sales channel advantage to getting out there?
I think our primary advantage, and this will sound arrogant, but is my background in the B2B space. Not to say there aren't other people that have it, but I'm very experienced in that market, and the people we're putting in place to come together, looking at resale agreements and a variety of things that they've seen a great opportunity in this as well for their clientele, and I think it's something we can rapidly accelerate and get to market.
Okay. Well, you've given some anecdotal reasons that people have provided you with and discussed customers that you've touched already, but do you have any quantifiable evidence for demand, or are you at a point now where you're taking either repeat orders or requests for pricing from repeat customers? How do you quantify the demand, or how do you know you've got quantifiable demand there?
Well, the quantifiable demand really...
or is it too early?
It is yet to be completely finalized and justified. What I can say, and this sounds anecdotal again, but everybody we've shown this platform to has liked it, and we're currently in negotiations for several sizable deals that went from, hey, show me this, that sounds cool, to, hey, I want you to show this to all of my senior management. Hey, we're not sure how big this deal is going to be, but we're going to get it done. And now it's, where does it all fit?
So to get that kind of market response, or to develop a market, is customer education required as part of your market development strategy? I mean, do you have to get out there and teach the customer something about this product or service that they don't know or hadn't thought of before? Or is it fairly...
Obviously, there's always going to be the customer you have to educate. But the majority of folks have used the GoToMeetings, the WebEx, they've used those types of systems before. So and that's one of a primary piece of how we structured everything, and the functionality of Trusted Response was looking at what's existing demand. Can we create a better turnkey mousetrap than trying to create something that's so, hey, it's so revolutionary and fantastic, and it's take forever to do the education piece, and have growth take forever to actually accomplish.
So simple and familiar. So is a tech service requirement part of this, and can that become part of your revenue? Is there a revenue center associated with technical support and service?
There is, and there's also a additional revenue stream in conjunction with custom implementation. So, for example, a deal that we're finalizing right now, they want us to integrate it specifically into their custom CRM. And we're like, okay, sure, give us API access and we can do it. And we're currently figuring out how much that's going to cost. And that's a whole nother revenue stream in that regard.
So you've talked about your initial target market. Is there an entry wedge or target market that you've clearly identified, and what is that?
The two primary are financial advisory and legal.
And do you have any numbers on the size of those markets? Is that quantified?
I do. So financial advisory, as an example, as of last year, there were 307,431 financial advisors in the United States. 1% market share of that is, I think, 3,043 or something of that nature. And that puts us, it's a pretty, at that number, I think we're looking at 15 million in revenue, with 1% market share of that. And I think that's and 3,000, that's an attainable number with the appropriate aggressive marketing and being hyper-targeted in how you're going after it.
Okay. Is there any cyclical or seasonal nature to this? I wouldn't think so, but this is probably not a cyclical product, although sometimes software is purchased on cyclical refreshes in corporate America. And have you ascertained the product life? How long might that be before the software would need to be renewed? And now, of course, you're providing cloud software as a service, but there might come a point when a refresh is required, or
Well,
do any of those issues apply to what you're selling?
Obviously, as you know, in technologies, those potential concerns, there's always some variable that can come into play on that. That said, the way we built and structured our software, all of those, the upgrades and refreshes happen in the cloud. So you don't have to do any upgrades as a customer on your end. We can be upgrading functionality and announcing, hey, you now have access to X, Y, or Z.
Is there a way to upsell on that, though?
Yes.
Additional functionality
Yes,
creates an opportunity to sell more
Absolutely. We already
enhanced services.
Yes, sir. We already have 5 additional services, functions that can be upsells.
And is your company pursuing a single product, or are you creating a line of products here? I've heard you talk about one product, the Trusted Response product.
Copilot. Yeah.
But is this going to eventually be a product line, or are you sticking to a single product?
I think it kind of depends on what your definition of a specific product is.
Okay.
Things we've been mapping out on additional functionality upgrades can almost be products themselves, and one of which was already built, already ready to go. The e-commerce, the transaction component, we've already built. Everything we've built is modular. It's going to be completely separated, standalone. Payment, for example, with the same one line of code that you would install for everything else, you can now have the e-commerce and the transaction capabilities on your site or in your web application. So, putting back my vendor hat back on, I can tell you as a vendor, there were plenty of times clients came to me saying, hey, I want to be able to sell stuff on my site now. And you're like, great. So I'm either going to completely rebuild it from scratch, and have to integrate some third-party platform, or we're going to have to build it on another third-party platform and try and inject this in here. If you came to me as a vendor and said, hey, guess what? You got that client who has a variety of things they want to sell, but they don't want to have to do a bunch of complicated development, spend a lot of money on that in time. Guess what? You have FTP access probably. Install a line of code, click refresh, and now they have the ability to do e-commerce transactions. So that's a whole other potential.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I could. So we've asked a lot of questions, and we're almost out of time. But I appreciate you offering our investors insight today into Trusted Response. I might say before we wrap up, is there anything we didn't cover that you very briefly here at the end like to mention? I know you're going to be giving your formal pitch tonight, but anything that we didn't get over that you thought we should have today?
I'm trying to remember. You asked me a bunch of very deep questions there. No, I think I guess the last thing I'd really like to say is we spend a lot of time and effort, and I know every entrepreneur has spent lots of time and effort, and they think they have the greatest thing since sliced bread. We've really approached this as I think we got a cool thing and a great thing since sliced bread, but we've really put a lot of time and effort into the business logic, and is this something that actually solves a problem, not versus just having some cool tech gizmo, which a lot of people who develop SaaS platforms think they have the coolest thing ever because they've, from a technological and a programming standpoint, done something crazy complicated. We have, but you're not going to hear me talking about how complicated our software is, because we're trying to create a streamlined, simplistic solution for day-to-day business problems and to maximize ROI on your time, advertising dollars, and growing your business, which anybody who's ever been an entrepreneur or owned a business before, that's our ultimate goal anyway, right? Is to become successful and grow our companies.
John, that's outstanding. I'd like to thank all the Angel Capital Group members for following along with us today. Trusted Response is on the road now, visiting a number of our investor teams, and the entire Angel Capital Group league will have an opportunity to either live or during the video rebroadcast see the Trusted Response funding pitch, and as well as this Q&A. So for our investors, be certain, please, to review the Venture 360 report and all the supporting due diligence material on the website, theangelcapitalgroup.com for our members. And John, thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed our few minutes together and look forward to your success.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks. Have a great afternoon.
You too.